scientific title is the South Coast Specialist. And so I'm based here in Santa Barbara, but I have really jurisdiction and spread my help along the Southern California coast between Santa Barbara and San Diego. But of course, the whole entire collaborative network spans the entire California coast. So I'll be talking about the Marine Protected Area Collaborative Network and honing in specifically on the Orange County area because that's what's most relevant to you all. So maybe it's not changing slides. There we go. So I'll start off with some of the Bolsa Chica protections, which Amber was already alluding to. We'll kind of get into a little bit more detail there. I'll open it up to question and answer after that. Talk generally about the MPA Collaborative Network and what we do, and then talk about the Orange County Council, which is one of our 14 collaboratives, and how you guys can get involved or at least learn more about what we do. And then we'll open it up to a final Q&A, just to kind of break it up so you guys aren't listening to me talk for an hour to an hour and a half straight. No one needs to hear that tonight. You guys will be bored stiff. So broken up with some Q&A. So get ready to engage with us. So you might have seen this many times. This is, of course, our Bolsa Chica Ecological Reserve trail map. So some of you are very well familiar with all of those orange lines which represent the trails. And there's lots of bodies of water that move further inland with varying levels of protection. Habitat, fish, all sorts of things are protected, and we'll kind of go into more of those details. The Bolsa Chica Ecological Reserve, you guys are very well aware, is just one of those levels of protection. And it gets really confusing because there are so many different ways to protect either an area of land or a body of water. So we'll make sure that it stays relatively simple, and you'll recognize some of these amazing species that are found in the Bolsa Chica area. So the Bolsa Chica Reserve, as you probably know, is about 1,300 acres of coastal estuary, and it includes many different habitat types, from the plant and animal species themselves all the way up through mudflats, salt marshes, coastal dunes, seabird nesting areas, and riparian zones, as well as freshwater marsh. So you really have quite a diversity of just habitats alone. And these Bolsa Chica wetlands are, of course, important for supporting a very diverse ecosystem. And you guys all hopefully have been able to experience that, seeing species of birds, for instance, that might not be found elsewhere. Bird and fish species alone are one of the primary reasons why they decided to create an ecological reserve here. Some of those species, of course, are endangered. The Bolsa Chica Ecological Reserve comes with a few regulations, and that includes no commercial fishing. There's one particular area that does allow for recreational fishing at the northern end of outer Bolsa Bay, but in general, there's not much fishing happening here. And you're able to bring a pet, but only leave it in the car because we want to avoid animal disturbances, and visitors should be staying on those established trails. And there's a limited window as to when visitors are actually able to come to the ecological reserve, and a limit on the size of those groups so that we can minimize how much of an impact we're having on the wildlife and the habitat here. So you might be wondering, how does this relate to marine protected areas, which is a whole other set of designations. Marine protected areas are far and wide. So if you'll see on the map, there's a lot of pretty colors, and across the state, there are actually 124 marine protected areas. Those different colors actually represent the various types of marine protected areas, which, like Amber said earlier in the talk, are essentially pieces of water that are set aside for some level of protection. We keep the term marine protected area very broad because there are so many different varieties, and it gets pretty complicated, but I'll try and make sure to not get you guys too bogged down in the details. There are 3 found in Southern California. If you were to move up and down the coast, there's actually a few others, but let's focus on Southern California because that's my specialty. And we have, first and foremost, state marine reserves, which are the most stringent level of protection and essentially are no-take. And it can be anything from a type of extraction like fishing or mining for oil and gas, or it could also include disrupting wildlife. If there's any kind of disturbance there, maybe you're following an animal, something like that, trying to get a good photograph, that could still be considered take if you're disturbing that animal's natural behavior. So in state marine reserves, there's no take allowed. State marine conservation areas, which is actually the focus of Bolsa Chica's protections that we'll delve a little bit more into in the next couple slides, are no take, like a marine reserve. But in general, that type of take tends to be things like dredging to make sure that boats can still pass and the water doesn't get too shallow. And that's just one example of how a state marine conservation area could still involve no take of marine species, except for some of those reasons. And there are also special closures. Just to briefly go over that, we have special closures in a few parts of Southern California where there's either nesting seabirds or areas known to have rookery of any kind of seal and or sea lion. And we want to keep distance from those animals, especially during certain times of the year. So those special closures tend to be more seasonal. And really all of these marine protected areas you can think of as underwater parks, either national or state park, or since you're most familiar with ecological reserves, in a lot of ways they are similar to ecological reserves, but either in an ocean or estuarine environment. Over in Orange County, there are 7 different marine protected areas that are designated by the state. So we're focusing on state level here. There's other levels of protection federally and also locally. So as far as the state marine protected areas, we have a variety. Some are more coastal and some more inland to protect the wetlands. And of course, we'll be focusing more local to you all. So we have a Bolsa Chica Basin State Marine Conservation Area, or I might say SMCA with the same meaning. And that happens to be no take. And there's also Bolsa Bay SMCA. We'll zoom into those right now so you guys can get a better picture. And as far as our protections go here, you can actually see in green the Bolsa Chica Ecological Reserve, and that is overlapping with the 2 state marine protected areas, or SMCAs here. So it is very important to kind of make those distinctions and have in the back of your mind that we have varying levels of protection, although you'll see in a moment when I hone in on each one, a lot of the same protections that are given by the Ecological Reserve are also given to these SMCAs. So most is overlapping for a reason, because it's just doubly protected, but the same things are protected. And we like to make things really complicated for everybody. But there are a few distinctions that I'll go over in just a second. So Bolsa Bay SMCA first, shown here in blue. All these colors do have meaning, but hopefully they just allow you to see the differences here. So Bolsa Chica Bay actually, or sorry, Bolsa Bay. It's easy to get mixed up in the names. So they're both Bolsa Bay and Bolsa Chica Basin were designated back in 2012. So they're relatively recent marine protected areas. As I started to allude to, some of the reason for these particular designations was to protect the estuarine habitat. We also have nursery here in the estuaries for lots of different fish species and certain species of birds that have special status. In particular, Bolsa Bay actually helps to represent a certain portion that it has tidal influence in this coastal wetland. And there is actually some shore-based fishing allowed here. As far as Bolsa Chica Basin SMCA goes, as the name implies, with no take, there is absolutely no fishing allowed in Bolsa Chica Basin. Those are the primary distinctions here, and we already went over what's in the ecological reserve. So we have an overly complicated view of really just trying to cover all the bases in the levels of protection because this is such a special area. And I'll open it up to questions about anything I've talked about thus far, MPAs in general, and specifically about the Bolsas.
So the only difference between inner and outer Bolsa Bay, they have different designations. The reason they have two different designations is you can fish by Warner Avenue on outer Bolsa Bay. Is that correct?
So I am less familiar with the legal terminology, but if I back up here, you can actually see the little fishing icon, and I think you just said off of Warner Avenue. So this would be your area that you are able to fish within the Bolsa Bay SMCA. So yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying.
I have a question about the water offshore that is not covered under the protection. And I've seen commercial fishing boats parked off the water inlet, picking up halibut that are apparently spawning in the bay. Is there any way that that offshore area could also become a protective area?
While it's possible, knowing how long this the process is to just get a single marine protected area in place, we'll talk about it more when I discuss the MPA collaborative network in the next section, but it's a very lengthy, at least years, if not decades long process of engaging stakeholders, getting input, revising, re-revising all these plans to put in protected areas. And I'm not sure if there's anything on the docket currently to protect waters that are coastal or even more offshore from Bolsa Bay, but I think it's possible that in the future it could be, but at this point, I don't know if that's.
Well, several years ago, the Amigos applied to the Fish and Wildlife Board to designate that, and nothing ever happened with it. They sort of ignored the suggestion.
Yeah, and there's a lot of reasoning behind wanting to go forward with certain designations and maybe not with others. And I think the way that they went about after the Marine Life Protection Act in 1999 of actually going through region by region and designating first in the Central Coast, moving their way up and then down the coast. Southern California was kind of the third stage. They really want to do these in like bulk runs, from what I can tell, because they're getting dozens of people in the room to discuss how they can put a marine protected area in place. And there is quite a bit of opposition in general. So it's always better to start early, and maybe just the timing wasn't right, but it is a little bit before my time, so I'm not sure. If there's anyone who knows better on the call, they can jump in.
I can chime in real quick. If you guys are interested, Steve Yaffe just wrote a book called Beyond Polarization about the entire Marine Life Protection Act initiative and the process of designating these 124 marine protected areas. It was I think total almost 8-year process to put them all together. And there was a lot of negotiations. It was science-based, but stakeholder-driven. So there's representatives for the South Coast from all sectors, 52 stakeholders representing commercial fishing, recreational fishing, non-consumptive, Audubon, different agencies. And there was just a lot of negotiations and trade-offs and trying to get, from some perspectives, the most protection possible, and from other perspectives, the least protection possible. So it was quite an ordeal. It's supposed to be adaptively managed, which means there's long-term monitoring in place. And if they don't work, they get reevaluated. So coming up in 2022, there'll be the decadal review to see if since the 10 years that they have been put into place in 2012, are they working? And, do we need to take another look? Generally, it takes a while for for us to be able to see changes in habitat-based conservation like this. But that 2022 review, if you guys are interested, should be fascinating to hear from the scientists what changes they're seeing in these marine protected areas. And at that point, there's opportunities for reevaluation. But yeah, I'll try to share in the chat too the link to the book Beyond Polarization by Steve Yaffe. It's a very it was an innovative process, and I was a part of the stakeholder group as well, and it was difficult at times, to say the least. But I think the state of California is pretty proud that they were able to come up with this network with so many people involved.
Thanks for sharing that, Kala. Are there any other questions? Okay, so we will seamlessly transition into the MPA collaborative network. And so we kind of started talking about the Marine Life Protection Act, which was passed by the California legislature in 1999. The network was actually meant to improve our use of marine protected areas. Marine protected areas, of course, have been happening either de facto by truly sustainable use of the ocean and its resources from our Native Americans that really are the true stewards of our oceans. And of course, implemented marine protected areas on a statewide level have happened much prior to the 1999 Marine Life Protection Act. So this was really to make sure that the MPAs weren't just paper parks or parks that aren't very effective, and to truly think through on a science level, but backed by stakeholder input, how can we create a very large network of marine protected areas that are also very effective. And we have 14 coastal county collaboratives within our marine protected area collaborative network. And we really wanted to create a network of stakeholders to create that buy-in so that once the Marine Life Protection Act had put all these MPAs in place across the coast, they wouldn't just fall by the wayside and people wouldn't actually really know what they were meant to protect nor follow the rules. So roughly coastal counties, all 14 of them are a part of our network, which the network itself is really an umbrella structure to get these stakeholders involved from the bottom up. So rather than have the state tell us how we should be managing marine protected areas, well, we do need that structure of the state. We also need structure at the grassroots level. And it's, you know, it was really Cala's idea to create this network. She is the director of the MPA Collaborative Network. And then it has taken, you know, all of the volunteers. There are quite a diverse group of people. We're always looking to improve our diversity and inclusion, but at this point we have over 600 collaborative members across the state with 385 or more, probably more, organizations represented. And there's groups, everyone from ocean businesses to tribal representatives, science and academia, so both the researchers and the educators, the local, from city to state and federal government is also involved in our collaborative network. And I'm sure I'm missing some groups as well, but all of them volunteering their time, at least for the most part. And they're able to do a lot more with a lot less. We'll get into that in a little bit, but essentially making the money go further because of those very strong connections and using each other's resources. So ultimately our mission is to empower these coastal communities to be a part of that MPA management and ultimately to encourage ocean stewardship that goes beyond just marine protected areas. We want people to fall in love with the coast so that they, of course, want to go out and protect it and tell all of their friends what they're doing to protect it. This is just one picture of many faces, and there are a few different areas that the marine protected area or the MPA collaborative network tends to work in. First, we're very focused on education outreach because people aren't understanding what marine protected areas are in the first place. Of course, there's no way that they can be effective. So reaching out to groups that might not otherwise hear about MPAs, especially those that are spending the most time on the water. And that's something that we're interested in working on within our collaborative network, is reaching those underrepresented and disconnected communities across the state so that all of the voices can be heard. We're also working with partners to do research and monitoring. While the collaborative network itself does not conduct its own projects, there are many partners that focus most of their time on research. Everything from monitoring the water quality of their local estuary, which I know is one project of Bolsa Chica, or Amigos de Bolsa Chica. There's folks that do plankton tows, as you see in this picture here, and a huge variety of projects. I could go on and on about the different projects that our collaborative members do, but of course I can touch on that later if you want to learn more. We also are working in the enforcement and compliance realm, and while that might throw up red flags for some people, it's truly important, because if we're not actually making sure that people are following rules within the marine protected areas, there's no way to show that in the science that these are working. And so it is really important that enforcement is able to get out to the water and educate the public about what marine protected areas are and for them to know themselves. And that is an area that I am focusing on as the South Coast specialist, so I'm happy to answer more questions about that. So I kind of mentioned earlier, we're making looks like I'm kind of breaking up here. Hopefully you guys can still hear me okay. I think my internet's kind of glitchy. So each collaborative, they are able to make the money go a lot further than maybe some other groups might. And that's truly because of the strong partnerships that we work really hard to make happen and keep those partnerships strong. So there's an assessment of the collaborative network as a whole, and they actually wanted to estimate about how much in-kind value each collaborative brings. They estimate between $1 and $3 million of in-kind contribution from a single collaborative alone. So it's pretty impressive for a group of volunteers, and we're really fortunate to be able to get that kind of assessment to hopefully later use that to get future funding. And I will wrap up talking about the MPA Collaborative Network with a fun picture, the best kind of picture, and some of our highlight projects that have been done across California. Everything from coloring books so that youth can get more engaged in their marine protected areas and which types of creatures might actually be protected. And there's also teacher toolkits, as you can see by this fish stuffed animal here. And that is used to teach people about the bigger and more fecund or reproductively successful and more valuable really fish that can be created in marine protected areas, as well as countless brochures and all sorts of educational resources. So with that, I will open it up to questions more specifically about the MPA Collaborative Network, or if you have questions about the previous section that you just held off on, I'm happy to answer those now.
I have a question about when you talked about the contribution of the different collaboratives, are you talking about the different chapters, the different
You can think of them as chapters. We call them collaboratives. So okay. Across the state, there are 14 that roughly align with the coastal counties. There's some, like for instance, in Santa Barbara, it includes both Santa Barbara and Ventura County. So we can't just call them counties. It's too messy for that, but they act similar to chapters, like from other nonprofit organizations.
In the so that figure that you showed, that you mentioned it's in kind, but also contributions. And how often do you make those assessments? How's that done? And I guess my question is, as part of a collaborative, how can we directly contribute to the resources used to protect the MPAs?
Yeah, two good questions. So this in-kind study was done once. There was a focus on Orange County, which I'll bring up in just a bit, but this was really a estimate of that range of how much is potentially brought in because of those valuable partnerships, especially when you think about the grants that maybe a researcher has and brings to the table, or the amount of people educated by a single toolkit. And I don't know that there's any plan to do another in-kind valuation. I would guess not at this time, but yeah, it really is. That's why we bring it up.
We have 14 collaboratives. That's pretty impressive of how much this volunteer-run organizations for the most part volunteer run, are supporting the public structure framework of MPAs. It's really incredible. I would love to get a copy of that later, because I'm pretty sure it would be something that we would want to also understand and use to show the importance of having these groups active along the coast. So, really
yeah, I'll show later that there's an academic paper written about Orange County specifically, but it is really great. We're very proud of our collaborative network, not only because of the value put on them, because it's really so much more than, you know, the number value.
And for us who work, you know, as this add-on component, the component that comes, you know, that connects the people, the society with the policy that is created from the top down. It really shows how the bottom up is supporting the top down in ways that are obviously impressive, like 1.1 to 3 million per collaborative in a array of 14 collaboratives. That's pretty impressive. So
yeah,
I have a question.
yeah.
Do you have in the different collaborative, are there things you are looking for? Are there avenues that we could pursue that would be within our wheelhouse or our ability to do that you would like to see happen?
Yes, thanks for asking that, Judith. So one thing that we've been working on very diligently lately, especially because there was a recent request for proposals for a National Estuary Program grant, is for us to connect all of our partners that work in estuaries so that either A, we're able to inform them that there's a grant and we can help connect them with partners that they might not already know about, or reconnect them with partners that they do know about and just haven't had the time yet. So we help facilitate that interaction and potential, you know, getting of a grant to do the work that they've been wanting to do for a while. And then the other thing, B, would be our proposed estuary working group. It's something that hasn't quite been created yet. We have lots of partners that are on board already, people that we interact with a bit more frequently. And we're still looking to get anyone who's interested and wants to have a say in how estuaries are managed from the ground up in this estuary working group, or to just connect resources. You know, I've been seeing there's some kids that keep on poaching in this particular estuary and marine protected area. What can we do about it? Should we put in a sign? What's the best way to address this issue? And then putting a lot of great minds together to really work through issues as they come up. Especially because within the Marine Protected Area Network, we tend to focus a lot on the ocean because it is the majority of those 124 MPAs. But that doesn't, you know, that's not to say that the estuary MPAs are any less important. It's just easy for us to get overwhelmed by the sheer number of them. And then the differences can be complicated, not only for us to help inform people about, but also for the public to just understand. Because as we went through with the Ecological Reserve and the 2 different state marine conservation areas, you know, it took me a minute just to read through it and understand, wait, the only difference here is the fishing. And there's no one summarizing that easily, at least not yet, and especially for estuaries. And that's one thing that we strive to do, and would hope that Amigos Day, Bolsa Chica could, you know, even if it's just one person on this call wants to join in, that would be a success. Are there any other questions about the MPA Collaborative Network? Okay. So we're on to our 3rd and final section here. So thank you for hanging in there until the Orange County portion. So one of our 14 collaboratives, and the very first, is the Orange County MPA Council. So their name is a little bit different. I still refer to them in general as a collaborative because they are still a collaborative, even though because they were the first, they had chosen the name council. And they do actually tend to be a bit more formal in the way they do business, everything from having a memorandum of understanding just to keep people accountable, really. And they do sometimes have some voting, and also ask that people come to 2 meetings before they, call themselves members. And then there's a membership agreement and a strategic plan. So they are very organized, and we appreciate that. I will say that not all of the collaboratives do things the same way, which is fine because we want them to choose how they manage their collaborative. And the Orange County MPA Council, or OCMPAC, as I'll refer to them from now on, a little shorter name, they were established back in 1999. So if you remember that date, back to when the Marine Life Protection Act was passed. And they have become a model for the other 13 collaboratives, of course, with flexibility, but a lot of the collaboratives have formed, based on some of the successes that the Orange County Collaborative has experienced, and also learned from anything that they might have initially struggled with. They have done many different community science projects. We tend to say community science projects versus citizen science because of the connotation. And so there's one example of a current community science project going on, and it is through the California Academy of Sciences, where anyone's able to take part in a season-long, what is typically an event, but is now a couple of months during the best low tides, called Snapshot Cal Coast. And that is something that the MPA Collaborative Network has been a part of for a very long time now. If you haven't heard of it, I can go into more depth later, but really just taking pictures within tide pools and then sharing them on an app that's free called iNaturalist. And of course, following those really important tide pool rules, like not picking up animals and things like that. And that's another project that OCMPAC really ran with in the beginning, because there are so many great places to tide pool in Orange County, but also a lot of people and a huge human disturbance in general to a lot of the intertidal zones. Just to give you a little about who's who and kind of the structure of each collaborative. So there are generally 2 to 3 co-chairs, or the leaders of the collaborative, so that we can, have the most streamlined communication and, have some really take charge and usually delegate. So within OCMPAC, for instance, they really love creating subcommittees. I noticed that Amigos de Bolsa Chica also has some subcommittees like grant writing and education, and that's something that they also have in addition to a research subcommittee and others. So really keeps it organized, and so the work doesn't just fall on a couple of people, although it still tends to do that, and so we're always happy to have help. The 2 current co-chairs at OCMPAC, first is Ray Heimstra, and he is at Orange County Coastkeeper, and Lana Nguyen at California State Parks Orange Coast District. We tend to favor diverse roles and diverse representation within the co-chairs. For instance, we wouldn't want to have 2 people representing state agencies within one collaborative if we can help it. So that maybe we get the nonprofit side of things as well as the state side, and maybe in some of the collaborators there are actually 3 co-chairs, and that could be a researcher, just to have balance within the collaboratives. I think that structure speaks for itself in how we really try not to overly manage, but still make sure that we're thinking through our leadership within each one of the collaboratives. A couple of the past OCMPAC projects include everything from signage that you may have seen in the tide pools or near the beach. So no collecting, and we've actually had many conversations about that recently. But you will actually see, if you look at the sign next time you're at the beach, that there is a little logo that says OCMPAC, as well as a Department of Fish and Wildlife and possibly other logos. So there are real on the ground things that this collaborative creates and helps to implement, and it's very exciting. For instance, for me to go to a marine protected area that I had never been to in Orange County last week, and to actually see the OCMPAC logo and show it to my brother and say, hey, look, this is a part of what I do. So that can be really rewarding. Some other things that are shown on the slide include brochures. So some focus in more on tide pooling, others are just MPAs in general. And those are very locally driven. In case you can't tell already, this is the whole point. We want the local members of the community to actually drive the management and to create these pieces of education and really anything that they so choose to get involved in. And then there's also a little snapshot of that in-kind assessment of Orange County and OCMPAC here, which I can find, or maybe Kala or Nicole can find, my coworkers that are on the call, and either share it in the link here. And I also had sent some resources for future reading or just our websites for you guys to see after the call. Another recent project that has not only happened in Orange County, but is happening first there and then up the state, slowly but surely, especially due to COVID. So end of last year, OCMPAC held a compliance workshop. And essentially this is to get members of the public together to discuss any issues they're seeing on the beaches, whether it's dogs off leash or that are disturbing, sea lion pups, or, I've been seeing people taking hermit crabs from the tide pools. What do I do about it? Things like that can get brought up during this workshop. And that would be, a thing that could happen into the future across the state. So if you know folks that are in Los Angeles County, that's where we'll be headed next. After the compliance workshop, our general next step, with a little bit of time after, is to train up those allied agency officers. So anyone who's got a badge and or a uniform that interacts with the public, hopefully on a regular basis. That's kind of our goal. So our hope for doing enforcement trainings is so they can understand MPAs a lot better and anything they might be able to enforce, and for them to actually be pushed to make those contacts because they're more confident in the law. There's everyone from local sheriffs to lifeguards on, multiple levels of lifeguard, whether it's, the new ones just hired by the city and are seasonal, to those that have been around for a while. There's Coast Guard sometimes in these meetings, as well as kind of the ultimate enforcer of the regulations, California Department of Fish and Wildlife game wardens or wardens. And really anyone else who might be able to help enforce rules, anything that could include littering in a marine protected area to not having a valid fishing license and taking even what is legal take, but they're breaking other rules. So this is an ongoing process that will continue to move up and down the coast. One of my roles is to help put these on and then to actually track any enforcement action, whether it's a contact made to the public or an actual citation that's written, and then to compile all of that information so that we can share it with the state in a way that helps our enforcement to do their job better and gets more people power out on the beaches as well, especially in the areas that might be hit harder by violations. Another thing I'll add is there's actually money that has been set aside through our fiscal sponsor, the Resources Legacy Fund. So when any issue is brought up during the compliance workshop and or enforcement training, that actually has anywhere between $10,000 to $30,000 set aside per county so that we can address these issues, like putting in clearer or more signage in areas where maybe the signs have been graffitied or, you name it. We probably have tried to address those issues that are all brought up by locals. Another really fun project that we have been working on for, I would say, a couple of years now are remotely operated vehicles, also known as ROVs, also known as underwater drones. We've got a picture here. You can see it's actually attached at the surface, or that's what this yellow tether is. But they're a really fun and new technology way to explore marine protected areas, or really any area. Could be a pool. That's what we did and during our most recent training, just to practice driving these around. I helped teach the Laguna Ocean Foundation's interns how to drive in between pool chairs and pool nets so that we could maneuver them better when they actually hit the ocean, whether it be a harbor or some area of open ocean. And that's one really fun advantage to becoming a part of your local collaborative. We have two mini ROVs per collaborative, and they get shared amongst collaborative members that have been trained up on how to drive them and maintain them. So a perk of the volunteership would be driving these around, maybe exploring subtidal areas that would be a little difficult to access as a diver, or you just want to get a different picture of it because they do take video footage. One thing we're exploring and expanding on are live dives. We recently got a grant for the Santa Barbara Channel region to implement live dives so that we can actually stream video to whoever wants to watch. So you can stay dry while exploring the local waters that are protected and, of course, some of the most amazing to watch. And of course, mini ROVs are a great way to get involved. A few other ways to get involved. We have mailing lists to sign up for if you are interested in hearing more about the events or just general updates from the Orange County MPA Council. We've got ways to connect with so many different groups, especially for those that might be looking to get into new projects, are wanting to branch out of their typical, what we call silos, but really just your usual friend group, really, so that we can broaden those horizons and really learn from each other. In addition to the mailing lists and ROVs and networking, I think just being a part of something that is so large across the state and has been shown time and time again to bring the state value, otherwise we wouldn't be here, is, it's a really powerful thing to be a part of. I feel like you can't really overstate that. And I will leave it at that. My email is at the bottom. If there are questions more specifically about the Orange County collaborative or anything that I've talked about, I'll just open it up to you guys here. And thank you for listening to me talk for over an hour. Oh, thanks, Joanna.
Thank you, Aubrie. That was great. Yeah, so if anyone has questions, please feel free to unmute yourself, ask away.
Respect Leipzig, I've got a simple one. How often does the Orange County Council hold regular meetings?
Good question. I forgot to mention that. So like I said, they're very organized. Their pretty regular meetings are every quarter. So, you know, every 3 months or so, they hold a meeting. They have been virtual lately, as is what you would expect with the times we're living in. And we actually had a very great turnout for our most recent Orange County Collaborative meeting. One thing that we're trying to do is to broaden the scope of who is reached out to when we, you know, call for people to join us during this meeting. And we had some really valuable discussion come out of it.
Is there an annual budget for research to help document the impacts of the MPAs on the ecosystem?
That's a good question. I would say, so within the MPA Collaborative Network specifically, our budget doesn't necessarily go straight into research grants. So like I said earlier, we really focus on the education outreach and the enforcement and compliance. That's just something that we've received funding for, and really what our partners have and fiscal sponsor have told us to focus on are those two aspects, less so the research and monitoring. And I am unaware of what the state's budget is for research and monitoring, but that's a really good question. And now I'm curious. Maybe someone else knows.
It's pretty, I mean, for some reason I had 6 million stuck in my head, but I'm not sure if that's right. But this is the reason why we aren't as focused in the actual research. Of course, many of our members are researchers and participate in the state-funded long-term monitoring project, and so they're doing monitoring. I mentioned earlier that there's a 2022 decadal review, and that's when all the monitoring results from the state over the past 10 years is going to be shared with the public. And so that's something we can always reach back out and just let you guys know when it's coming to us, so we can get those results and share those results and those opportunities to see if these MPAs are working and what the impact is. So there definitely is state-funded monitoring through the Ocean Protection Council. Oh, wow. So Nicole just said I was low. I was definitely low as 6, but you know, it looks kind of like a 9.
Yeah, so $9.5 million for long-term monitoring projects, and that's from the Ocean Protection Council, or OPC.
So is that for the 10-year period? That has to be for the 10-year period, right? Yeah. Okay. Nice.
Not an annual budget. They like to work in longer chunks of time.
Right. For those monitoring programs, this is really interesting because we do have a number of collaborators who are in a research area. So we're constantly trying to think of ways to pair up and do community science in combination with funded research from other sources. This is good to pass on to them and see if anyone.
Yeah, and actually, the Orange County Collaborative, OCMPAC, they have a research subcommittee that meets regularly as well. And it's UCI, Cal Poly Pomona, Santa Ana College, Cal State Fullerton, and I think a couple of others, and then a couple independent research firms that participate in that.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Yeah, and another advantage to being a part of the collaborative is hearing about these grants, hopefully first, to get funded for your own research or really any kind of any kind of funding that we come across that we think our partners might be interested in. That's part of the support that we offer in the structure, is to share that knowledge with you all, so that even if we're not necessarily the ones applying, although we have applied ourselves, especially across the state, then at least somebody is applying, and probably whoever is the best fit, because that's really important in actually getting that funding itself. Like for instance, there was the Ocean Protection Council small grants put out last year, and we recently heard back that some of the collaboratives did get funding for certain projects. We have it cross collaborative, so maybe there's a couple in the South Coast, a couple in Central California, and you know, some North Coast folks too that all get on board and are able to submit a joint proposal, which can really strengthen it, especially for those that are reading the grant and see, oh, hey, this is something that can be expanded across the state, but it's already kind of there because the partners are across regions.
Aubrie, could you explain sort of the mechanism by which we could establish a Bolsa Chica State Beach Marine Conservation Area? Because it seems to me that that would, just like the fight that Amigos did to establish the ecological reserve, it seems to me the next logical step would be protect that region along the coast. I think it was Bill or somebody was saying to have a commercial trawler right outside that tidal inlet. And so everything you're doing to preserve the area of Bolsa Chica could be lost right outside that. And it seems to me like that would be for the Amigos, to me, like a natural step, even if it's a 10 to become, we need someone to step up. And I know this is really hard because everybody's busy, but that the idea that we need to get someone to be present at the OC collaborative or the council, I think that's critical. And then also to join forces with other estuaries along the California coast. I think there needs to be, I can't emphasize that enough. It seems to me we're always isolating, like you said, in our silo, and we're not working together with OC Coastkeeper or with Crystal Cove Conservancy or with other groups, even within the reserve. And I think that's so critical because of this polarization that exists in our society. We need to join forces so that we're not alone. And then, of course, the other thing is to, you need to have someone to reach out to stakeholders that don't necessarily share your own points of view, to have an area where it's safe to have those discussions so we can talk to each other, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's a good point, Thomas. I definitely think that, you know, the more the merrier. And if, you know, only one or a couple of you is able to be a part of OCMPAC or attend, you know, maybe just the next meeting. I realize people are very busy, so I guess it's actually Nicole just put in the chat a little bit more about OCMPAC and their website, so you can learn a little bit more about what they do. Hopefully the time commitment isn't too much, but maybe amongst yourselves at some point, you know, designate someone who wants to really be a part of it, or be that.
Yeah. Maybe this would be a good moment to just give people a little bit of background of why we invited you to be here today.
Sure.
We didn't have a chance to actually have this internal discussion yet, just because of timing. But so the way it happened is, I think you all saw an announcement for the Institute, right? Like I think Jen, our new intern, posted in some list, and somehow you guys saw the announcement for the Institute and then realized, oh, Amigos, right there. Let's reach out. So Aubrie here reached out to us by email and asked if we would be interested in joining. And so this is our first conversation with them. We're trying to learn more about what the expectations are. And it should be said, as Tom was explaining, we have been discussing the need for this, for these collaborations outside of our existing network. We have been discussing that and talking about ways we could do that on our own without knowing that that structure was already available to us through your organization. So this is very serendipitous because it comes in the moment that we actually have tapped on several of people in this call here to ask them to facilitate those connections. And so it's very timely that we got your email and that you were able to come and talk to us today, you know, so we didn't have to sit on this for too long. So I guess the next step for our group is to have that internal conversation of how to make that, who's going to attend the meetings, what expectations should we have for ourselves? And you already answered a few of those questions by email. So to the others in the call that perhaps didn't know of this background information, we are talking to Aubrie and trying to understand better what the roles would be that we would have in this collaborative here in Orange County, in the hopes that we can bug all of you to help us attend those meetings and submit reports if that's what it's required, or participate in events if that's what's required, because I think that we were all looking for an opportunity like this.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just fall back to, these are of course volunteer based, so we don't like to say like is required. Of course, if you were to step into a leadership role with OCMPAC, for instance, we would expect more from you. But at this point, we already have co-chairs that do a lot of that legwork. And I mean, that helps out everybody else who really just wants to join in and be a part of the conversation. And so I think participating is really all we're asking. If even that, it's of course, totally up to you guys and how involved you'd like to be. But I guess it's, now that you know that this structure is in place across the state, it only makes sense to at least follow along. And especially when it comes to the estuary working group, that's really where we could see you guys fitting into this space. Like I mentioned, it's not fully formed by any means, and you would help to shape what it does, but effectively to make it so that when someone goes into an estuary MPA, they know that they're there and what the rules are and why it's actually valuable to them. So lots of different components to that. But really, it's what you guys want to do with the information.
Very exciting. Any other questions? Then I'm going to ask Aubrie if she has any questions for us.
I guess I'm curious if there are things that you've seen on a regular basis, because you've spent 100% more time in Bolsa Chica. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to go there yet. I grew up in San Diego and I live in Santa Barbara now, so I don't always make it to Orange County. It's in between for me.
Great stopping point. Yeah, I was going to say, when you go visit your family in San Diego, it's a great place to stop and stretch your legs.
Yeah, as long as it's not 10 at night.
Right. Yeah, would anyone in this call be willing to share with Aubrie a little bit about what it's like? I don't know if you had a chance to watch the documentary that we have on our website, but we have a documentary talking about how this group was formed and how this group was the group that quote unquote saved the Bolsa Chica, right, from development. So that we have a documentary film. Jen, do you mind putting the link for the film on the chat so that Aubrie and Kala and Nicole can see this? Would any one of our volunteers who visits so many of the people in this call go to the Bolsa Chica every single day. Mm-hmm. Many of them know all the birds that are the Bolsa Chica at any time of the year by heart. and some of them collect trash at the parking lots and keep the place clean. So when you're looking here in this call, you have people who have been working for the wetlands and for the Bolsa Chica for over 50 years. So these people have donated their life, their time regularly for this place and for this cause, you know, in a broader sense. So would anyone want to share with Aubrie what they see on a regular basis, the good, the bad, and the ugly?
Yeah, and maybe an emphasis on the bad, just because that's part of my role, is to, you know, are people breaking the rules a lot, or is it generally pretty tame? And, you know, there's folks just going for a stroll and taking photographs. Like, I guess everyone's going to have a different sense depending on who you've seen lately. Probably that's what's going to come to mind first. But that's, you know, that's going to help us to make sure that, you know, those issues can get addressed.
Jerry, do you want to give us a report?
Well, the number one issue for the reserve, I think, is dogs or lack of wardens. To get a warden, if there's an issue at the reserve, is 45 to 50 minutes. And they won't even come for dogs, and dogs won't even be handled in courts because the courts will throw it out. So it's the enforcement issue, I think, is whether it's dogs or whether it's people, although dogs are the big issue, but there are smaller issues like drones and people down off the trail. But the dogs are the big issue.
That's helpful to know.
Instead of trying to explain tonight the history and the issues of Bolsa Chica, I think we should extend an invitation to Aubrie and Calla, given the opportunity, to come get a tour of the Bolsa Chica. We can show them the reserve itself, and we can show them the fishing location where there are some issues because it is marine protected area, and explain in more detail the history of this wonderful site, which sight unseen is kind of hard to do.
I think it's a great idea. Right now, obviously with COVID-19, we're a little bit limited on when we can schedule the visit, but we are working on preparing a virtual field trip video right now. So we just got funds. In fact, Amber and Jen are going to be filming this Sunday. So at least you get that first tour, and then I'm going to second what Vic said, that as soon as it's possible and safe to do so, definitely, if you can come over and get a tour from one of these trained naturalists. I want to say something about the dogs. The dogs issue is one that I've been working with this group for almost 7 years now, and it's one that I hear from the beginning. I think that it's time we really take it seriously and start an education campaign that targets just this topic. And we don't, you know, the signs that we have, the signage that we have at the site are inadequate, insufficient. And on top of that, I think that this would be a great cause to have a campaign